That said, joining me now, King's College economics professor Brian Brenberg, Operationsinc Founder and CEO David Lewis, and Fox News contributor Steve Cortes. Thank you, gentlemen, all for being here. Brian, let me start with you. Sean Spicer called Dodd Franks a disaster. We hear that word a lot from the Trump administration. Is that accurate?
For small business owners, I really do think it is. This has hurt community banks and regional banks, and those are the banks who are lending to small businesses. They're having a very hard time getting the capital they need to grow their businesses because these small banks are saying, we can't handle the burden of this regulation, the cost of complying, the lawyer fees. The larger banks can do that. The smaller banks can't, and that's why I think you see the administration focusing on how to get the lending going again with these smaller banks to help smaller businesses.
But listen, David, this was all came about after the financial crisis, the mortgage-backed securities that went south, and there was this vow we'll never be in that situation again. Does Dodd Franks protect the consumer as much as Elizabeth Warren would have us believe?
There certainly are protections there, but I think everything that's been indicated today shows that there's ways to improve on it. So maybe it was a little bit too far moved to the left, and now they're going to bring it back to the center.
Steve Cortes, let me bring you in. Blake was just saying there in his report, this is a law, so I have to go through Congress if we're going to get it overhauled. Is that possible if we need to make the kind of changes that those people have said we need to make? Can they get it through Congress?
Right. I certainly think they can because we did so well, and I say we because I campaigned for Donald Trump. We did so well in the fall and won not just the White House, but controlled both houses of Congress. But I think it's important to note that you don't have to change the law to have a material impact on the economy. Just enforcement alone. I think enforcement has been far too onerous, frankly, under the previous administration when you look at things like the Volcker Rule and things like Dodd Franks. And Gary Cohn, the assistant to the president, is exactly correct. Our banks are in sterling condition right now. They are the best capitalized banks in the world, but it's almost like we're making them fight with one hand. We can compete far, far better, and particularly the smaller banks, which Brian mentioned, if we take some of the onerous, unnecessary regulation away from them. I think it's one of the reasons why, for the first time on record, we have more businesses closing in America than opening. That's a tragedy. It's part of why we've endured such slow growth over this past decade. Part of breaking out of that is getting loans going again, because the banking system is the grease that makes the economic engine hum.
But, Brian, back to you, and especially those regional banks. They're the banks that provide the loans to the small businesses, which in turn create all of the hiring. I mean, it's very important. You cut off that money supply. It's no surprise that we've struggled to create jobs.
Yeah, and it's no surprise we've had growth at 1.9%, 2%. Look, we need growth. We saw it today with the jobs numbers. I mean, wages aren't growing. People are coming back into the labor force. Wages aren't growing. They'll start to grow again when the economy grows, but you need banks to play a role in that. They just can't do that right now because of these regulations.
David, Donald Trump made a lot about Wall Street, went after Wall Street on the campaign trail, was going to drain the swamp. We have a lot of Goldman Sachs alum at the White House, and now we're looking to roll back the regulations on the big bad banks. The perception, and certainly for Democrats and those opposed to the Trump administration, this plays right into their wheelhouse, doesn't it? A proof that Donald Trump only cares about the big bad banks.
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at the assembly of his cabinet, you're looking at people out of the banking and financial industry. And those individuals are going to be perceived, at least, as having some type of an agenda tied to their industry as a whole. When you take a look, though, at the actions that we're trying to accomplish here, maybe not necessarily with the best level of execution, but at the end of the day, you're looking at something that's designed to make it easier to do business and to essentially create an environment that grows jobs.
Steve, let me get to you on that. By appearances' sake, Donald Trump not really living up to what he said on the campaign trail with all the big bankers in the administration, or at least advising him as well. And now he seems to be trying to make a move in favor of Wall Street.
Right. Actually, I am sensitive to that criticism, but I would also point this out. If you look at Gary Cohn, for example, he's a registered Democrat, somebody who gave money to Hillary Clinton in the past, and yet Donald Trump brought him into this very senior economic position. So I think what that shows us is that President Trump is willing to be incredibly reasonable, and that he wants talent first and foremost. And some of the best and brightest minds, yes, have come out of Goldman Sachs. It's an incredible organization. Then candidate Trump was very hard on Wall Street because Wall Street did, in many ways, abuse the trust and, frankly, the wallets of the American taxpayer, and that's not going to happen again. But having said that, there's also an enormous amount of talent and brain power on Wall Street, and I think that what President Trump has done is say we need the best and brightest from the private sector. If you look at his cabinet, It is full almost entirely of private sector people who are going to come and not just tinker around the edges in Washington, D.C., but smash the rigged crony capitalist system of Washington, D.C. in favor of regular working Americans.
You're quite the diplomat.